mother like she was a suspect just for being poor, not after hearing stories of boys who looked like him ending up in handcuffs instead of being helped. And yet Lily needed protection, medical help, safety, and Marcus was just a kid with nothing, so he did the only thing he could think of. He took her home, to their tiny apartment with peeling paint and a fridge that hummed louder than it cooled. And his mother, Denise, came home early that night, exhausted and smelling of bleach. And when she opened the door and saw Marcus standing there with a frightened little girl clinging to him, her face went pale, then fierce, then determined, because Denise had lived long enough to know when a moment mattered. And she listened as Marcus told the story, every word spilling out in a rush, and Denise didn't hesitate. She wrapped Lily in a blanket, gave her water, checked her bruises. And then she did what Marcus couldn't. She called the police, and when they arrived, lights flashing red and blue. Against the cracked walls, Marcus braced himself for blame, for suspicion, for questions that felt like accusations. But something unexpected happened, because one of the officers knelt down to Lily's level and spoke softly, and another looked at Marcus, not with doubt, but with something like respect. And within hours, the apartment was full of activity, paramedics, detectives, social workers, and the story unraveled into something darker and more twisted than Marcus could have imagined, because Lily had been reported missing 2 days earlier, her disappearance part of a string of attempted abductions across the state, all linked to the same abandoned black sedan, and the man who took her was already suspected in other crimes, and Marcus's discovery gave the police the break they needed, fingerprints, fibers, a timeline, and by morning, the man was arrested at a motel miles away, and Lily was reunited with her parents, who wept and hugged Marcus like he was their own son, calling him a hero, a word Marcus had never heard applied to himself. And the story hit the news. The poor black boy who found an abandoned car and saved a kidnapped child. And suddenly the town that barely noticed Marcus couldn't stop talking about him. Reporters came, cameras flashed, people praised him, but praise doesn't pay rent. And once the news cycle moved on, life threatened to slip back into the same hard pattern, except something had shifted, because a local community leader saw the story and reached out, then a scholarship foundation, then a retired teacher who offered tutoring, and opportunities Marcus never dreamed of began to appear, small at first, then bigger, and years passed, and Marcus grew, not just in height, but in confidence, in purpose, driven by the memory of that trunk opening, by the knowledge that doing the right thing when you're scared can change lives. And he went on to study criminal justice, determined to protect kids like Lily and families like his own, and on. The day he graduated, he received a letter that made his hands shake, because it was from Lily, now a teenager, thanking him for saving her life, telling him that because of him she wanted to help others too. And Marcus realized then that the shock he felt when he opened that trunk wasn't just fear, it was the moment his life split into before and after, proof that even in the poorest, most forgotten corners of the world, courage can rise, hope can survive, and a single choice can echo for decades. And that's why this story matters, because heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear worn-out shoes and carry empty stomachs. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that goodness still exists, then subscribe, stay with us, and keep believing that even the smallest actions can open trunks of darkness and let the light pour out. If you've ever scrolled past a story and later wished you hadn't, don't make that mistake now, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after it ends. And before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this channel brings you real, emotional stories that remind us how one single moment can change a life forever. Now listen closely, because this story begins on a quiet afternoon in a forgotten American town where nobody was watching, nobody was helping, and nobody expected a miracle. And it all started when a poor black boy named Marcus, barely 13 years old, thin as a shadow, and wearing shoes 2 sizes too big with holes in the soles, wandered into a field behind an abandoned strip mall, a place where broken glass glittered like false treasure and weeds grew taller than hope. And Marcus wasn't there looking for adventure or trouble or secrets. He was just hungry. Hungry in the deep, aching way that doesn't go away when you ignore it. Hungry in the way that comes from growing up with a mother who worked 2 cleaning jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on. From nights when dinner was a slice of white bread folded over nothing. From mornings when school breakfast was the only reliable meal. And on that day, school was out because the pipes had frozen again. So Marcus walked. Because walking was free, and walking sometimes led to cans you could return for a few cents, or scrap metal, or maybe just something to distract him from the gnawing silence of an empty apartment. And that's when he saw the car, half sunk into mud at the edge of the field. An old black sedan with peeling paint and a cracked windshield. looking like it had been forgotten by time itself. And Marcus stopped, because in his world, abandoned things sometimes meant opportunity, sometimes danger, sometimes both. And he circled it slowly, heart beating faster, noticing the way the trunk sat slightly uneven, not fully closed, just enough to catch his eye. And he told himself to keep walking, because his mother had warned him 1,000 times not to touch things that didn't belong to him, not to draw attention, not to give the world another excuse. But hunger and curiosity are powerful forces, especially when you're young and invisible. So he stepped closer, the mud sucking at his shoes, the air cold and still, and he reached out, fingers trembling. And when he touched the trunk, it felt warmer than it should have been. And that's when fear crept up his spine like ice, because abandoned cars aren't supposed to be warm, and he hesitated, breath shallow, every instinct screaming to run. But then he heard it, faint but unmistakable, a sound that changed everything. A soft, desperate knocking from inside the trunk. 3 slow taps, then a pause, then 3 more. And Marcus stumbled back, nearly falling, his mind racing through every horror story he'd ever overheard, every warning about dead bodies, criminals, things you don't come back from. And for a long moment he stood there, torn between terror and something deeper, something that wouldn't let him walk away, because whoever or whatever was inside that trunk was alive, and alive meant someone needed help. And Marcus knew what it felt like to need help and not get it. So with shaking hands and a pounding heart, he grabbed the rusted latch and pulled. And the trunk sprang open with a metallic groan. And what he saw inside made the world tilt, because it wasn't a monster or a corpse or anything he expected, but a little girl, no older than 6, her dark hair matted, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her wrists bruised, her eyes wide with fear and relief all at once, and she gasped for air like she'd been underwater. And Marcus froze, staring, unable to process how a child ended up locked in a trunk in the middle of nowhere. And before he could even think, the girl whispered, "Please don't leave me." And something broke open inside him. Something fierce and protective. And he helped her out, his hands gentle, his voice barely steady as he asked her name. And she said it was Lily. And she didn't know where her parents were, only that a man with a kind voice had offered her a ride when she got lost outside a grocery store. And after that, darkness. And as she spoke, Marcus felt anger burn through him hotter than hunger ever had, because he knew the world could be cruel, but seeing it carved into the fear of a child made it unbearable. And he knew they couldn't stay there, because whoever put Lily in that trunk might come back. So he took off his jacket and wrapped it around her, even though it was thin and torn. And he held her hand and led her away from the car, scanning the horizon like a hunted animal. And they walked until his legs ached and his lungs burned, until they reached the edge of town. And Marcus had to make a choice that would define his life, because he didn't trust the police the way some kids did, not after watching officers question his mother like she was a suspect just for being.